Hi, I'm Dr. Thomas Armstrong, and I'm making a series of short videos to introduce my new book, The Power of Neurodiversity, Unleashing the Advantages of Your Neurodivergent Brain. This is a completely revised and updated second edition of a book that I originally wrote in 2010. The topic of today's video is good career matches for people with mood disorders. And I want to emphasize that for a person with a mood disorder, making a decision about what kind of career you want can have a big impact on whether or not you're going to go through a episode of depression or mania or not, because these conditions are largely caused by stress. I mean, there are the inborn genetic issues, of course, but it's the interaction of the individual who is more susceptible, let's say, to stress than a neurotypical person that makes it important, I think, for you to think about what direction you want to take in terms of your career. You know, of course, following things that you're interested in, things that pay well, etc., are all very important criteria to use as well. But this should be kept in the back of your mind. And I kind of wish I had had that perspective when I was starting out in education in my early 20s. I might not have picked special education working with kids with behavior disorders. That was a little on the stressful side. I might have picked something more like tutoring. But at any rate, let's take a look at some of the issues that go along with making good career matches for people with mood disorders. The first thing I'd like to counsel is avoid high stress jobs. Now, I'm not saying take low stress jobs, because a certain amount of stress is part of any job, and you don't want to be setting yourself up for something that's going to be boring or dull, or so low stress that you don't even want to get up in the morning to go to work. But a high stress job can work against your genetic vulnerabilities, put it that way. Jobs that involve a lot of emergencies, in this case an emergency room physician or technician, might be piling on the stress too much. Some other possibilities to avoid would be air traffic controller, firefighter or emergency medical technician, a high-level manager in a corporation where you're expected to work 80 hours a week and get deadlines in on time or risk being fired. Emergency room physician I talked about, a 9/11 operator, a day trader who sits in his office trying to make guesses and bets against the stock market. That sounds to me like a setup for a high stress job. So, of course, if your obsession or your deep interest is with any of these careers, don't let me sway you away from that, but just include it in the calculus that you make about pros and cons of taking different careers. And even if it pays money, a lot of money, like being a stockbroker or a corporation executive, it may not be worth the money to end up working 80 hours and having a breakdown as a result. So now let's look at some of the positives, what kinds of criteria you should use in looking for a job or creating a career. First of all, look for work that lets you be creative, and that's because so much of the research around people with mood disorders, including major depression and bipolar disorder, suggests that there's creativity. Writers are notorious for being depressed, and in fact, most of the creative arts involves some kind of connection with disorder, bipolar disorder, or some other kind of mood disorder. So think about, careers where you can channel a lot of that despairing energy, where you can uh, actually manifest some of your darkest dreams, so to speak. I mean, comedians, you see some of the comedians and their dark jokes are finding ways of channelizing their depression or their anxiety disorders also. But I'll talk about anxiety disorders in a future video. So some careers for creative work might be a writer or researcher, musician or a music producer, a dancer or choreographer, a sculptor or an inventor, painter, actor, and entertainer. And then you may think of others. In fact, any job that allows you a certain amount of creativity is going to be good for you, but particularly the creative expressive arts, where the idea is you express your feelings and therefore make them less destructive to you. Next, and these are all ideas, not fixed in stone, find a career that involves helping people with their emotions. Now you might think, well, I have enough trouble with my own emotions. How am I going to be able to help anybody else? And if you do feel that way, certainly don't go in that direction. But I want to say that people who have struggled with their emotions are often very good at understanding other people's emotions. They have greater empathy, for example, with somebody who's going through an emotional crisis. And so, excuse me, and so, getting the training, obviously, that you need, the certifications to be in the helping professions is vitally important. And assuming that you do those things well, you can use your emotional disturbance as an asset. There's a term that psychoanalysts use called the wounded healer. This is somebody who has himself or herself been wounded emotionally in the course of growing up, but they use that woundedness as a healing factor in a way that people who haven't had emotional turmoil in their lives can't understand, and therefore aren't as good at being healers as they are. So some possibilities for professions include a life coach or some branch of that, including like an ADHD coach, clinical psychologist or counseling psychologist, a counselor, could be a vocational counselor, a drug counselor, addiction counselor, and so forth, a chaplain, an LCSW, licensed clinical social worker, or MFCC, marriage, family, and child counselor. That's what we call them in California. You may have a different name wherever you live. Fitness instructor, massage therapist. These are just a few of the many areas available in the helping professions where you can use your familiarity with emotional development and self-development and self-actualization to help others become better human beings. Another area to think about is in the area of contemplative fields. And we're talking about philosophical, spiritual, religious realms. And this is because people with mood disorders are often deeply contemplative. Clinically, that's called rumination, and it's considered a negative symptom because it's from the clinical point of view, it's always ruminating over the same negative thoughts over and over again. But I'm suggesting that rumination blends into contemplation or deep thinking, and that deep thinking is an asset and that it can be used to help deepen the culture in which you live in. So some of the positions might include being there aren't a lot of philosophers, professional philosophers around. My sister always said she'd like to be a philosopher and put her shingle out in front of her office saying philosopher in residence. There aren't too many jobs like that anymore, but there are jobs for philosophy teachers, philosophy professors, or ethics professors, also involving the need to be contemplative and to take on deep life issues. Another role might be as a yoga teacher or a meditation instructor, where you get to maybe study Buddhist ideals, mindfulness meditation techniques, and so forth, and be able to speak from a place of wisdom to your students. And then, of course, there's spiritual or religious leaders of all variety and religions and beliefs. So we're talking about priests, pastors, ministers, imams, rabbis, who knows, Buddhist teachers, Hindu teachers, as well as Confucian-oriented teachers, um, uh, Taoist teachers. I'm trying to think of the other. I don't want to leave anybody out, but at any rate, you get the feeling that there are plenty of opportunities for people to receive spiritual or religious or philosophical training that can help them better their lives. And these are some of the roles that would allow you to do that. Finally, another good suggestion is work for yourself. So there aren't as many demands on you. That's what I've basically done most of my life. For 5 years, I was a special education teacher, but for all the rest of the years, and I'm 74 now, I either had my own typing and editing business when I was in my early 20s, or then after my teaching experience, I started to become a full-time writer and speaker. And so this worked really well because I didn't have to report to somebody to get a paycheck. I worked with individual speaking executives and editors at publishing houses. And although there were pressures, I could handle, working against a deadline if it was writing or something like that, much better than I could punching a clock, which can be stressful in its own way. So think about self-employment as a possibility for you, starting out really right at the beginning of your adulthood. Some possibilities include entrepreneur, freelance writer or editor. That's what I did actually. Typing mostly actually when I was in my early 20s. I lived in Cambridge, Massachusetts and Berkeley, and so I had a ready-made clientele of PhD and master's degree students that I would type their papers for them. Back in the day, before computers, when I actually had a Smith Corona and later on an Olympia Selectric kind of typewriter. But they're still available, those positions, using computers and word processing. You could be a web designer and have your own business. You could be a play therapist and work individually with clients, with children, let's say. You could be a gig worker. So much of our economy has been taken over by gig workers, people who work for Uber, for example, and are just available, kind of on call, and it doesn't hem you in. And although it doesn't pay well, it allows a certain degree of freedom that can be really important for people who are stress sensitive. You could set up your own tutoring business. You could be a wedding photographer. There are lots and lots of other possibilities for working for yourself. So I hope this gives you some idea of, if you're a person with a mood disorder, with a history of depression or bipolar disorder, this gives you some idea of the kind of career you'd like to create. And this, may be you're at the beginning of your career. Maybe you've already had some stressful careers and you've had a breakdown or two and you want to explore a different lifestyle. And this kind of advice would be hopefully helpful to you in creating a positive niche for yourself. I use that term a lot in The Power of Neurodiversity, crafting an environment that is optimal for you, that allows you to maximize your abilities and minimize your problems. So at any rate, that's a little bit about career possibilities. Maybe to help you in that regard, I've created a neurodiversity strengths checklist, which is in the book, The Power of Neurodiversity. And it's also available. It's a 200 items checklist. And it's also available if you go to my website, www.institute4learning.com. That's www.institute4learning.com. If you go to my homepage or my blog page and put your email in the box, you'll receive my 200 item neurodiversity strengths checklist in your email shortly thereafter. If you're interested in these videos, I've been doing a lot of them. This is my 37th video, and I've put them all on a playlist called The Power of Neurodiversity, which is the name of my new book. And go to Dr. Thomas Armstrong on YouTube and look at for my playlists. I have a number of playlists. Pick the one, The Power of Neurodiversity, and you'll have access to at least 36 other videos. I'm going to make a lot more too, though, so stay tuned. So thanks so much for listening in. I hope you get my book, The Power of Neurodiversity. I hope that the information is useful to you, and I wish you all the best wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much for listening and for watching. Bye-bye.